Well, welcome everybody. We're really excited that you could join us today. And like I said, I'm going to do a little intro. So my name's Andrew Wade. I'm the CEO of Case Specific Nutrition, and I'll be your MC today. I'm going to click the slides so that Hillary and Sina can do their best work. And so we have for you a presentation on the perimenopause journey, going through nutrition, lifestyle, and self-care. Sina and Hillary are phenomenal RDs on our team. So if you do not know them, I'll give a brief intro. Sina is our lead dietitian down at our Tampa, Florida location. For those of you that don't know, we do have our 8 locations in the Pennsylvania area, Erie, Altoona, and then surrounding Pittsburgh. But we do have 2 locations outside of the area in Tampa, Florida, and in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hillary is the lead RD of our Raleigh location. They are both very, very focused on women's health and work with the perimenopause population regularly. So this has been a big passion project for them. And I've really enjoyed watching them build this and plan this out for all of you. So I'm excited to introduce you all to them and let them take it from here. And so without further ado, I will kick it off to you, Sina. I think you're the one starting, if I remember correctly.
Thanks, Andrew. And thank you everyone for joining us today. So let's just dive right in. So the first thing we're going to touch on is what makes women different, right? When we're thinking about our hormones, men and women have completely different hormone cycles and the length of those cycles. Men hormones follow a 24-hour cycle where women's hormones are going to be over a 28-day cycle. So that in itself is a huge difference. Not to mention, there are various phases in a woman's life where their hormones are changing and fluctuating even more among those 28 days than normal. So we like to think about that as we move through everything as well, from childhood to perimenopause, which we're going to focus on today, all the way to our postmenopausal time. So, before we get started and really dive into all of the nutrition aspects of perimenopause, let's talk about the difference between perimenopause and menopause before we keep going. So, perimenopause is the beginning of that transitional period when our menstruation or our cycle starts to become a bit irregular. We still have it, but it's not the same as it was during our younger years. Our estrogen or progesterone start to fluctuate even more now than they do normally. And the age of onset for this is a little bit different for everyone, but standard is around mid to late 40s. And for every person, it can last a different duration of time, but most often we see this lasting about 2 to 10 years in women. It can also start as early as your mid 30s, or maybe your mid 50s. It really does range depending on the person. And now, when we get to menopause, this is when our menstruation or our cycle stops completely or is going very long periods of time, about a year, without having a period. And this is when the natural decline of estrogen and progesterone occurs, and that is what leads to our eventual stop of our period. And once we go a year without that period, then we are reaching that postmenopausal phase of life. So we talked a little bit about the hormones that go up and down, progesterone and estrogen, and we may be familiar with the typical phases of our menstrual cycle, so our luteal phase and our follicular phase. And you can see here just the general overall fluctuation between those two phases over our 28-day cycle. Now, you can see in our follicular phase, estrogen is gradually on the rise, progesterone is low and stable. And this is going to be the days where we are menstruating and right after menstruation. And then we hit our midpoint, which is ovulation. You can see that at the midpoint, estrogen has reached its peak. Progesterone is still pretty low, but it is at the point where it's slowly starting to rise. And then we have our luteal phase. You can see the estrogen is dipping as the progesterone is rising. And this is leading up into the second half of our cycle. Our body is preparing for menstruation again, but our hormones are going up and down quite a bit. And when we're at the point when our progesterone is high right here in our luteal phase, that's going to affect our mood and our sleep patterns. Um, which is why some women will experience fatigue, maybe mood changes during the luteal phase. And when our estrogen starts to dip a little bit lower, that can also contribute on the opposite end to our mood swings, bloating, or other symptoms that we may commonly associate in the luteal phase. Okay. And this slide is kind of just a less visual way of talking through the previous slide. So you can see here, we're breaking down the phases of the cycle by the days. So phase one, that menstrual phase, that first portion of the follicular phase is going to be about days 1 through 7. Phase two, the late follicular phase, about 7 through 12. In this part of the phase, the uterine lining is building back up. Estrogen levels are starting to rise again in preparation for our ovulation days, roughly days 13 through 15 of our cycle. And then we get to our mid-luteal phase right after that ovulation, around 14 to 21 days. Our body here is in preparation mode, progesterone starting to rise, estrogen starts to come down just a bit before it peaks again. And before we get to our late luteal phase of 22 to about 28 days, where both estrogen and progesterone gradually are decreasing, signaling that no egg in our cycle was fertilized here. And this slide, looking at it, may look a little bit overwhelming, but we don't need to be overwhelmed by all the different things that are on here. There's so much detail and so many different explanations that we could get into for this slide. But the big gist or takeaway that we want to get when we're looking at this is that our hormones are fluctuating greatly throughout our entire life cycle, from premenopause all the way to postmenopausal times. So when we're keeping it very simple, you can see the fluctuation. And as we get deeper into our life, the fluctuation becomes less and it starts to just not plateau, but maybe become more steady. And we don't notice as many peaks, as many rises. We just notice that it's in a constant state when it comes to our hormones.
So if we're really looking at the perimenopausal phase and what do these hormone fluctuations mean? There is no exact roadmap for perimenopause, and symptoms can really vary from person to person. Everybody is so uniquely different, and we can see different symptoms and experiences that people have. One of the most common first things people tend to notice is irregular periods. So whether that's menstrual cycle changes of heaviness of flow, maybe it's more spotting, maybe the length of your monthly cycle changes from a typical 28 to maybe longer, maybe it's 35. Um, there could be lots of different changes there. Other things that we can see might be some brain changes. So maybe we're a little bit more irritable. Maybe there's mood changes, anxiety, um, insomnia, restless sleep. These are some changes that we can also see as well. We're seeing that the fluctuating estrogen, it causes changes in our serotonin or our feel-good hormone. And so these hormones are going to affect our neurotransmitters, and that's where we see changes in mood and memory. Estrogen's impacted in interacting with our central nervous system. And so we're looking at how these fluctuations may make some of these changes. This is something where something like 5-HTP, it's a precursor to our neurotransmitter serotonin. And so that might even be a consideration if you're working with somebody as a supplement, as long as you're not taking an SSRI. Other changes that we might see because estrogen declining is going to impact sex drive and just overall vaginal health. This is where we can see libido changes for women, vaginal dryness, and then everybody's favorite, just kidding, hot flashes and night sweats, these temperature changes. So estrogen is going to impact our temperature control center in the body. So even slight changes of 1 degree of our body temperature can really impact how we're feeling. That thermoregulatory control center, we see it being impacted from this fluctuation in estrogen. And this is something where there's absolutely medical support if we're having extremes in this and symptoms that you should be talking about with gynecologists or PCP. And from a kind of lifestyle perspective, some things that we may explore might be something like Vitex or black cohosh, evening primrose oil. We can see some of these supplements being supportive here too.
At this point, we also are going to start to see some body changes. So we might start to see some weight gain or maybe an expression of like discomfort of individuals in their current bodies. Again, these are all going to be caused by our fluctuating hormone levels that we're experiencing. So as we are losing estrogen, we are increasing the rate at which we're storing visceral fat. Again, estrogen does so many things in the body, and this is just one of them. Another thing that's going to happen in this body changing, weight gain, discomfort in our body phase is going to be a shift of insulin sensitivity and glucose metabolism. So that in this point in time is just going to increase our risk of a few different diseases, maybe cardiovascular disease, diabetes start to become a risk factor. Estrogen, the loss of it is also going to increase inflammation. So if we're feeling a little bit more discomfort or achy, that could be a result of the inflammation increase that's occurring. We also, when we're talking about weight gain, we are looking at a loss of lean body mass, which may contribute to our body composition changing or that feeling of overall discomfort. So, weight is a number that we look at or that we associate with many things, right? Body discomfort, other things as well. But during this phase of our life, how can we decenter the overall number on the scale and focus on what is making up that weight number? So, when we talk about the loss of lean body mass, that is where we kind of want to put our focus. How can we work to rebuild our lean body mass, gain more, maintain what we have during this point in time, versus focusing on what that number on the scale is telling us? Because it tells us one thing, but it doesn't give us the behind the scenes of that lean body mass or muscle mass that we really want to focus on here. The other thing that we want, sorry, Andrew. Got a little bit ahead, but we will touch on this more in the next slide. As you saw, bone health is another big thing that we are focusing on during this point in time. So as we go through perimenopause, estrogen is the hormone that's going to help prevent bones by getting weaker, and it slows the natural breakdown of bone. So as our estrogen is fluctuating, this important thing that it does is also fluctuating or getting a little bit weaker. You can go ahead and flip now. We'll talk about more on that slide. So overall, when it comes to bone health, our peak bone mass is going to naturally decline with age. For most women, we reach our peak around age 20, and then it remains pretty consistent between 30 and 50 when it comes to our bone mass. And after age 50, we typically are losing mass every year at a certain rate. So when it comes to perimenopause and our lower estrogen levels that are kind of not doing the same things or sending the same signals at the same rate, this is where we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect the bone mass that we have and keep it as strong as it can be. So strong bones are going to support the active lifestyle we have, and that active lifestyle is what's going to help us build our strong bones. So, on top of that physical activity or incorporating any kind of activity into our day, we can also support our bones through the different foods that we're getting or the nutrients within those foods. Some of those key nutrients that we are going to touch on are going to be our calcium. So think of dairy or fortified dairy options, maybe some tofu, maybe some green leafy vegetables that we're having in our day. Vitamin D is going to be another big one. One of the biggest forms is going to be through our sunlight. So getting outside each day in the sun is going to be super important. You can also get that through different dairy or fortified dairy products with vitamin D in them, some fatty fishes or our egg yolks. Another one that we'll work to include and incorporate is going to be our magnesium. Things foods like nuts, seeds, again, our dark leafy greens, maybe adding some avocados in there when we can. And then we have our vitamin K, and this is going to be from our dark leafy green sources that we're having throughout our day. When it comes to physical activity, we really want to make sure that we are adding in different weight bearing or resistance training exercises to support that bone strength. So when we're thinking about that, think of that as walking versus swimming. So for walking, we are doing more of that weight bearing activity, whereas swimming isn't going to be as weight bearing. So it might not be supporting our bone mass in that way. Although it's a great form of exercise, it's maybe not supporting that bone health in the same way. And then we have talked a lot about weight gain so far already, but stubborn weight gain is the cause of our fluctuate, or is a side effect of our fluctuating hormones, we'll say. So, on top of that, it can lead to maybe slower metabolism, which is increasing our insulin resistance, which in turn is leading to weight gain. Now, we talked about this on the previous slide, but the overall number on the scale, working to reframe the number into the form of our lean body mass, and how can we improve that and make sure that that is staying consistent or increasing. There are so many different ways to kind of combat this weight gain or put it into play. And two of those things are going to be our nutrition impacts and our lifestyle factors. So, brief overview of the nutrition impacts are we creating a consistent meal routine during the day? Are we optimizing our protein intake to make sure that we're getting what we need personally so that we can maintain the lean mass that we do have? Are we including at least 25 grams of fiber in our day throughout the day? And the best way to kind of look at these three things is working with a dietitian or someone who can personalize those recommendations for you so that you know what works best for your body and your needs. And then those lifestyle factors. What's our sleep like? How's our stress levels? What's the movement that we're doing in our day? What is that looking like?
As we kind of dive into, all right, what exactly about some of these nutrition pieces and looking at them in more detail? When we have declining and fluctuating estrogen, as Sina talked a lot about, that's going to impact lean body mass and our bone strength. And it's harder to keep muscle mass and increase muscle mass as we age. So this is where protein becomes one of those star nutrients. Not necessarily something that we have to over stress about or obsess about, but it is something that we kind of want to just look at and our overall day and impact of what this could be doing for our bodies as far as making us feel our best selves and kind of optimize any hormonal changes that are going on. We also need to make sure when we're talking about enough for adequate protein that we're getting sufficient intake of our other non-protein nutrients like our carbs and our fats, because these are going to help the body spare protein from being used directly as energy and allow the amino acids in the proteins to really be focused on muscle building and repairing tissues in our body and supporting our hormones. And our lean body mass is such a key predictor of our healthy aging. And so the more lean body mass we have, often the better health outcomes that we have as we age. We also see protein not only from the muscular perspective and just overall energy intake, but how it influences immune function and wound healing too. So how much protein do we need in the day? As women get older, it actually increases what would be recommended as the minimum protein intake. So generally, bare minimum, everybody is going to need 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. But as women get older, we actually see that minimum increase to at least 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram per day. And then the word optimize becomes a key piece too. So, if we're really active or we do have particular lean body mass gain goals, or we have certain medical conditions, that's where we're going to look at what is optimal protein intake. What could be best for my body based on what I'm physically doing, my medical history, how I'm feeling throughout my day. And an optimal intake could range from anywhere between 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And really just assessing all of these different factors to see what is going to work best and feel best in our body. And so we're really just looking at, okay, we may need protein and getting it throughout the day, kind of spreading it with our meals and our meal pattern and routine and our snacks to kind of divvy it up. So we're not just piling it all into that dinner meal, and really kind of optimizing how it can make us feel during the day. Carbohydrates. This is something that often comes up in sessions when I'm talking with clients and figuring out, these carbs, what do they use for in the body, and, how might they be influencing how I'm feeling or body composition or lab values. Carbs are the body's main source of energy and can be a preferred fuel source. They support energy levels. They support muscles with glycogen stores in there. They're going to support digestion. And we see carbohydrates coming from vegetables like broccoli, our fruits, grains, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, dairy, sugars, maple sugar. All of these things are going to be sources of carbohydrates, with the amount of carbohydrates varying depending on the source. And it often comes up that, folks are concerned about the carbs leading to some of the weight gain, especially with the hormonal fluctuations going on in the body. But as long as we're really looking in these carbohydrates and having them in moderation, taking into consideration balance, they can be a really supportive part of our diet. And when we're taking into consideration sources, this is where simple versus complex is going to become a big factor here. So these simple carbohydrates, these digest super quickly. They can affect blood sugar levels because they're digesting. They can make our body's blood sugar rise pretty quickly. And then since they don't have any support factors to them, blood sugar can drop. So when we have a lot of these simple carbohydrates, and particularly when we have excess of these simple carbohydrates that aren't in balance, they can increase blood sugar levels and impact insulin sensitivity, and can potentially be related to some weight gain changes that we're seeing. In comparison, we have complex carbohydrates. So these complex carbohydrates are things that have fiber in them, they have more nutrients, and they have sometimes protein sources as well. And because they have these other pieces, fiber and these protein nutrients, they take longer to digest. So they're not causing that mountain peak in our blood sugar rise. It's kind of like more of a mound and a nice steady balance. So it helps keep our blood sugars well within range. And if we pair these complex carbohydrates with a strong protein source and some non-starchy vegetables, we get even better control and balance of this. So we can see how these carbohydrates can still support muscles, give us some energy and support our digestion, in creating balance on the plate and really focusing on complex carbohydrates. Not saying that we can never eat the simple carbohydrates, but when we focus and prioritize complex, we can see how they can work with our bodies and really support us. And I'd be remiss if we talked about carbohydrates and we didn't talk about fiber because it's my favorite nutrient because it does so many wonderful things. But also, it's one of the complex pieces of the carbohydrates. And so it's really important for our gut microbiome, all those little microbes that live in our gut, and it feeds them and makes them happy. And having the more diverse gut microbiome, we see better metabolic health, helps to slow down digestion, kind of a buffer for how quickly the carbohydrates digest and break down in our bodies, stabilizes hunger levels, makes us feel satiety with our meals and helps promote that blood sugar balance. And so for women under 50, it's going to be recommended to get at least 25 grams of fiber daily. And looking at even up to 35 grams of fiber per day may be beneficial for some people, depending on medical history and how their bodies are feeling. These higher fiber sources that we see can be beans and lentils with 7 to 9 grams in a half cup. Berries, particularly raspberries and blackberries, are going to have about 8 grams per cup. Strawberries are a little bit on the lower end because they have a higher water content to them. Oats, we can get some really good fiber from them, and particularly soluble fiber as well. And chia seeds too, about 5 grams in 1 tablespoon, quick add to parfait or chia seed pudding. And we see that these different fiber sources, we can sprinkle them in throughout our meals in our day to kind of slowly work our way up there and make sure we're meeting these fiber needs. And noting too that fiber may be something that could be customized too based on any digestive concerns. So definitely something that, would be a personalized factor for folks. Other things that we look at from that nutrition lens is what are supportive micronutrients and vitamins, phytonutrients that we're looking at to really support these hormonal fluctuations that we're seeing. So B vitamins, the body relies on our B vitamins like B6, B12, B2, folate, and they help us metabolize the carbohydrates and proteins and fats that we're eating. They support energy in our bodies. We get a lot of B vitamins from carbs and proteins. In vitamin D, Sina talked a lot about how vitamin D can be really supportive for our bone health. In addition to bone health, we see it helping with muscle, heart health, immune system health as we kind of fall into this, flu, cold, winter, fall season. Help support mood as well. Muscle contraction, blood clotting, nerve function. We can get vitamin D from our foods, but also from the sunlight's going to be our strongest source. Calcium as well, Sina touched on with that bone support, muscle contraction, blood clotting too. Magnesium is a fun one as well. This one helps with muscle relaxation. So instead of our shoulders being up in our ears, it can help us relax a little bit and help with stress modulation in our brains. Supports our mood, something that is a pretty popular supplement. I can get a lot of questions about this. Different versions of magnesium can do different things in our bodies, but we do also see it coming from things like dark chocolate, nuts, seeds, leafy greens. A good reminder to eat that dark chocolate at night time for that little magnesium boost before bed. Omega-3 fatty acids. These are going to be something that's really helpful in reducing inflammation in our bodies. And we also see it being very beneficial for our brain health and our mind, and also decreasing cardiovascular risk. And omega-3 is probably one of the most common things that comes to people's brains when I say omega-3s is going to be something like salmon, really rich in our omega-3 fatty acids. We can also see some omegas coming from walnuts or flax seeds, chia seeds. So great things to consider as part of your diet if you're going through that perimenopause phase. There's also supplementation. If you don't eat fish, we have an allergy. There's algae sources, or algae would be a plant-based source too if we don't include animal products. So there's definitely options for making sure we're getting this supportive nutrient into our diet. And so if we kind of wrap this into, all right, we talked about protein, we talked about fiber, we talked about these omegas. What could this potentially look like for us? How do we get enough protein? How do we get enough fiber? This is something that definitely could be customized to different preferences. But for an example here, maybe for breakfast, we do a little bit of a Greek yogurt parfait and we add some granola for a crunch. We have raspberries for fiber and we have those chia seeds for fiber. Mid-morning snack, we get a little apple and peanut butter action going on. You just hit up the pumpkin patch in the farm where you got these nice Honeycrisp apples that are delicious. And then for lunch, maybe we do some type of grain bowl. Lentils are really rich in protein, but also fiber. Quinoa has fiber and a little bit of protein as well. Some roasted veggies, some olive oil for that healthy fat source. Afternoon, keep it simple. Maybe you make a protein shake with some protein powder, or maybe you have a pre-made option that you like, or Chobani yogurt protein drink. That could be a nice little afternoon snack to tide you over until dinner. And dinner, salmon, veggies, sweet potato. So if you took this day and used these portion sizes, this day would equal 120 grams of protein, and you would get 28 grams of fiber with this example day here.
We talked a little bit about physical activity and its impact on different things in the body, whether it be bone health, lean body mass, all of those things. But let's really dive into it right now. So, we talked about as we age, we begin to lose some muscle mass and the ability to retain that muscle mass. So, adding in physical activity is going to be one of the most powerful tools for us. It's going to help us maintain our mobility, maintain our balance, and maintain our strength. So, the recommendation for physical activity is going to be around 150 minutes a week of aerobic activity and 2 times a week incorporating that resistance or strength training. So, aerobic activity, think kind of movement, walking, running, elliptical, things like that. And then more of our resistance training 2 times a week as well. Now, when we're thinking about this recommendation, I want to clarify that this is going to be on top or in addition to the activities that we are doing day to day in our normal life. So, whether that is cleaning our house or walking around or going from our car to our office, whatever those normal activities that we include, or what we like to call our ADLs, our activities of daily living, these recommendations are going to be in addition to that. So we can think of that as our recommendations for our exercise, and then our activities of daily living are going to just be our normal movement that we are going through naturally. Now, when we're adding in that physical activity, there's some benefits or reduction of the risk of some chronic diseases in there. It's going to help improve our blood glucose control, which is amazing. It's going to help improve our metabolic health overall. And then again, our balance and our flexibility as we age as well. And on top of that physical activity, right, we talked about 2 other lifestyle factors, and that's going to be our sleep and our stress management. I like to think of sleep as the cheapest form of recovery and the biggest, most important thing because it has an effect on so many areas of our life. It can impact our decisions when it comes to physical activity. It can impact sometimes decisions when it comes to food, depending on if we are getting enough sleep or not enough sleep. But it is all going to come down to what we do. So, when we're thinking of sleep and stress management, both of these are going to be very important for our brain health, our memory, our metabolism, and our overall mental health. A few things that Hillary has touched on in previous slides as well. And if we are someone who is in a state of chronic stress, that can lead to us experiencing just chronic inflammation. Think about perimenopause, where our body is already kind of in a heightened state, maybe of inflammation. Adding chronic stress on top of that isn't going to combat that inflammation in any way. And if we're in that chronic inflammatory state, there's a chance of disease progression or disease coming about from anything like that. So we want to do everything we can to help mitigate that stress or manage it to the best of our ability. When we're thinking about sleep, the goal is always to aim for about 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, right? And that's the duration, but what's the quality like? We want to make sure we're thinking about that as well. Do we need to enable a sleep time routine? What are we doing in that 30 to 60 minutes before bed? Is it making sure that we are having the best sleep that we possibly can as much as we can? So, exercise and increased movement is going to help improve that quality of sleep, creating that sleep routine. Maybe it's blue light glasses before bed if you have to be looking at a screen. Maybe you're taking a hot shower. Maybe you're doing some gentle stretching just to kind of wind your body down or signal it that it's time to start slowing down, time to start getting ready for bed. And Hillary talked about magnesium before when it comes to nutrients and mentioned that it's a good, right, relaxation supplement. So it is something that we can include before bed as well if we need a little bit help in the relaxation portion. So when we're thinking of that, magnesium glycinate is going to be a great addition into that routine.
So what if something isn't clicking? We've all been there. We're not seeing results. We are really hitting it hard with nutrition. We're gaining consistency and traction there. And so when something's not right, we're going to find the balance between kind of optimizing these results. And that can be challenging. It can feel really frustrating at this point. The things that I often see as being kind of these pitfalls or things that could be a hurdle that we're not even seeing as a hurdle could be something like overtraining. Overtraining, it could influence weight change and it could impact hormonal fluctuations in the body, immune system response. We could be getting a little bit more run down. So when we're talking about our training or exercise patterns, making sure we're pairing that strength training and cardio activity with the right kind of recovery, consistent fueling, especially with the protein and the complex carbohydrates, since they're both going to be really useful in muscle building and lean body mass. So just taking a look at what that exercise or training schedule looks like and making sure the fueling and recovery, taking the rest and getting the stretching in and the days off to give those muscles time to repair are part of that training and exercise program. So when we see exercise and nutrition and recovery all in alignment, that's when women can see more maintenance and growth in their lean body mass, improve energy levels, and to really support hormonal balance throughout perimenopause. Fiber and protein. I don't want to sound like a broken record over here, but the fiber and protein pieces, it can be so easy to start thinking about protein and meeting those needs that we kind of forget about the fiber. This is often something that I see is we focus on nutrition. We get really consistent in one area and then without even thinking about it or realizing it, something else slips. So looking at where our fiber goals are, where our protein goals are, and are we hitting those things? And do we need to figure out how to make it easier based on what your preferences are and what your routine and schedule is like? And kind of along those lines of looking at overtraining and exercise or protein and fiber, Underfueling can come up a lot too. We want to make sure that we're fueling our basal metabolic rate or BMR to make sure that we are supporting our nutrients and our hormones as best as possible. Since perimenopause brings some of those hormonal shifts that can influence our metabolism, muscle mass, mood, and recovery. If our energy intake is too low, maybe we are hitting protein and fiber, but we're missing some fats or carbs, and that's causing just overall too low of energy intake. We can see changes in cortisol and stress can impact thyroid. Our sex hormones can get downregulated without adequate energy intake, and we can see more muscle loss. So what we want to do is make sure that we are just getting in that nourishment to really support our body, support our hormones. So we're minimizing or mitigating any symptoms like hot flashes or fatigue, body composition changes, and we're just supporting our bodies there. And then Sina talked a little bit about sleep and kind of being that cheapest form of recovery. Poor sleep and higher stress levels can dysregulate our hormones as it's kind of our nighttime recovery and reset button for the night. It can impact even our gut health as well, which can influence our metabolism and influence our energy throughout the day, even our hunger and satiety hormones. If sleep isn't quite where it needs to be, it can send out signals to have more hunger hormone or ghrelin, because it's another way that we get energy would be from food. Now, I know sleep is really tricky to look at because there could be different work shifts or routine, social, family things going on, but it's just a place that we might look if something's just not quite right. So from that nutrition piece and lifestyle piece, that's where we kind of look at where do we start? What are these few things that maybe we can start to put into place here? So planning our meals, creating that consistent meal routine. And it doesn't have to be a really formal meal plan where everything's lined up to a T of exactly, but just having groceries on hand for the pantry, freezer, fridge. So you kind of have an idea of what could be some meals for the week, making sure you're accounting for any social events, but also backup plans in case that social event gets canceled. What's that last minute option of putting together, maybe it's just a simple sandwich and some salad kit on the side. And looking at protein and fiber. Again, we don't want to obsess about this and create more mental load for ourselves, but making sure when we are grocery shopping, we do have protein sources, whether they're plant-based or animal-based, that we can incorporate. And so my kind of cheat code for building these meals is just visualizing your plate with about a quarter of your plate, your protein, a quarter of your plate, your complex carb, and about half your plate non-starchy vegetables to help promote satiety and consistency with meal routine. And then moving our body. Start with something, anything. 5 minutes is better than 0 minutes. Committing and implementing an exercise routine can be really overwhelming. And so we want to make sure it does fit into the routine. And if mental capacity and just schedule wise, that's 15 minutes a couple times a week, just building that foundation. Because once we have that foundation, it's easier to progress and change. Consistency always over intensity. And I love the idea of the cut it in half mentality. Maybe you did intend to do a 30-minute walking or exercise session. Schedule just doesn't align. So what can I do? Can I do 15 minutes? Can I do 5 minutes? Because if I know it's something that's going to help my body and brain feel good. So how can a dietitian help? So looking at personalized nutrition recommendations that are going to be truly based on medical history, your lifestyle, routine, and preferences. Making sure we're creating discussion around building this plan that's going to help you celebrate changes that are happening, but optimize how our bodies are feeling, making sure it kind of flows. What are the ways based on what you like and enjoy in routine to get the protein and fiber? What can that look like for you? And Sina and I have both mentioned a couple supplements here and there. So looking at these supplements that make support our brain health, hormone levels, and so some considerations, and particularly the perimenopause phase, we might be looking at something like DIM or dianidol methane. And this is made from cruciferous vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower, and it supports perimenopause and menopause by helping produce more favorable estrogens and helping our bodies kind of get rid of the metabolites that we don't need. And it might be helpful for some women. It's not essential for everybody because it can interact with certain medications. And really, the best way to determine if DIM is going to be appropriate is having some lab testing that's going to include estrogen evaluation and estrogen metabolite evaluation. And if we are supplementing with it, anywhere from 250 to 300 milligrams per day can be beneficial. The next one is Vitex or chasteberry tree. The beneficial properties of this plant are going to be the flavonoids and terpenoids and iridoid glycosides, and they contribute to what these really supportive properties are in breaking down progesterone and aiding in perimenopause and menstrual cycle irregularity. So it can be supportive from menstrual cycle perspective, hot flashes and night sweats during this perimenopause and menopause transition. This is one too that's also pretty dose dependent. And so consulting with a healthcare professional or a dietitian to help determine what a safe and effective dosing could be, often between 40 and 300 milligrams for folks. And then this 5-HTP, I mentioned that this is a precursor to our neurotransmitter, our serotonin, feel-good hormone in our brain. So we can see it supporting brain health like sleep, stress, and anxiety. This supplement should also be checked with any medication interactions, dosing being anywhere from 50 to 200 milligrams. Or we might look at something like inositol. It's a type of sugar. It's found in foods and produced in the body. And it works with helping regulating signals, cell signaling and how our cells talk to each other, and the hormones and how they interact with the neurotransmitters. So it can be really beneficial for insulin regulation and blood sugar balance, and anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams of a nice combo and the correct ratio of myo and dechironinositol may be very beneficial. And then lastly, this vitamin D, this might be something that, based on lab testing, is really going to depend on how much you need. If we have a really, really low vitamin D, a higher dose. If it is in a normal range, maybe just a maintenance dose, but it is something that's a fat-soluble vitamin. So we don't want to take really high doses for too long of time because we can have some buildup in the bodies and our fat stores. And then Vitex, I don't think I mentioned that one. That one is something that can help too with our hormone regulation and supporting hot flashes and supporting menstrual cycle regularity. And so working with a case-specific dietitian, you can also see how we can customize this by ordering labs and reviewing labs, helping you order labs with your primary care physician as well, if that's something that you want to do, but just really looking at these and then saying, okay, based on this information, what may be supportive for you as far as supplements or even different nutrition or lifestyle patterns. We also like to look at gut health. Those little microbes, how are they signaling metabolism in our body? We use something called Vitract at Case Specific, and we can really look at optimizing in working from a preventative, proactive care model and helping to see what's going on there. So if you're looking to work with a dietitian, if you're in the Pittsburgh area, tons of locations there. East Liberty, Mount Lebanon, Robinson, North Hills, you name it. And then I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Sina is in Tampa, but we all also work virtually as well. We have a nice match site on case specific. If there's something in particular that you're looking at, you can kind of filter for different concerns, conditions, questions, and it will help kind of filter you towards the dietitians that may specialize in certain areas.
These are just a few places that you can find us on social media to see the things we're posting, education about perimenopause and other things as well, along with our podcast clips on YouTube. And that is everything that we have for you guys today. We hope you really enjoyed our presentation. It looks like we do have a few minutes left for questions, or if anyone has any more specific questions they don't want to ask, please feel free to reach out to Hillary and I via email to ask them directly if that's what you're more comfortable with. But if anyone has any questions right now, we're happy to answer them.